hear when people like us say search. Because some people, if you say it to them in the workplace, the intranet pops into their mind, or a portal pops into their mind. If you're talking to your next door neighbor, probably it's Google that is the equivalent of search for those people. So search has become something very different inside the enterprise than it is as a general web search. Issues around security and privacy, those exist throughout all of the different realms of search. So we were actually going to start out, I think we're going to start out with the issue of bias, if that's okay with you guys. So we hear a lot in the papers about bias in search, about how we're being forced into thinking in a particular way, perhaps because of bias that has been introduced, perhaps by bot traffic, perhaps by something else. Inside the enterprise, we don't hear as much about bias, and yet there are some things within enterprise search where we actually need to build in some bias for corporate purposes. So let's talk about that, and just what are the differences that you see in bias amongst the different types of search that we get involved in? And is it good or bad?
Well, I think it's unavoidable that I don't know anybody who is unbiased, do you? And people build algorithms, people build systems, people read search results, and their views of the world are consistent with themselves, but may actually be injurious or offensive to other people. And that goes for inside the organization and outside. And you know, things like the Me Too movement and blindsided a whole bunch of men who expected that it was perfectly fine to do what they were doing. And that's a matter not of their not being good people necessarily, but rather that their view of the world was very different from somebody else's. So bias itself is, as I said, unavoidable. There's a great deal of bias as soon as you deal with language, and of course, search is a language-based technology. In terms of preventing it, how can Google do 1 billion searches a day and have little people sitting there reading all of the searches and the search results to make sure that they are liberal or conservative or Western-oriented or not Western-oriented? I don't think it's physically possible, much as we might sometimes want it to happen. But the fact is that algorithms and people and matching people to information is something which is promoting bias, if you want to see it that way, or not. That's all.
Yeah. Is this working?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just move it closer to you. It's voice activated.
Yeah, from an information security perspective, I think of bias in enterprise search in a kind of a different way. And I'm thinking to a situation that we actually saw with one of our clients, fairly well-known organization that probably everyone in this room knows, actually had a compromise on their website. And the reason for the compromise was because the search engines rank this website very highly. It's a very highly well-known, highly regarded organization. Getting a link to your website, which is trying to peddle online pharmacy type things or other kind of shady goods, would be a huge boost to rank, get your search ranks up. So their website was compromised and thousands of links kind of hidden, scattered throughout the entire organization's website just to get that, Google search rank algorithm to bump their results up. So we see a lot of cases where, and you've probably encountered this in your own lives, where you do a Google search and you'll land on some site and you're really trying to understand, why did I get here? And behind the scenes, it really, this item that you search for, you click the link to that site, but there was a piece of malicious code on that site that said, oh, you searched for such and you came from Google, I'm actually going to silently redirect you, and you'll get one of the most common things we see today, you'll get a pop-up that says your computer is infected with a virus, call this telephone number and somebody from Microsoft will help you. That's how that happens. So, apart from
Newsflash, if you call that, it's not Microsoft. Newsflash!
It is not, and actually, it can be a lot of fun, too, if you call that number, knowing it's not Microsoft, by the way. But yeah.
Have you done that?
Actually, yeah, we did a presentation where we did that as a proof of concept for a client to kind of show you this is what's going on out there, right? And it's really kind of interesting to see, there's an entire industry out there that, the end result, follow the money. And so in that example, they're making their money by getting your credit card number when you call them so that they can fix your computer. And their marketing approach is to go and compromise other legitimate websites to drive traffic to sites that they've already infected with that pop-up. So there's an entire industry. And what's really interesting is when you call those guys, if you listen, there's an entire call center going on in the background. This isn't one person in the basement. There's an entire industry set up that is driven in large part on manipulating search results.
So if you were responsible for enterprise search within an organization and you think that you're being used and there's some sort of a clone out there that says, I'm masquerading as you, how do you find that out?
Well, a largely important part of any good information security program is continuous monitoring. So every information system you're using, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, is logging everything that happens, right? It's the age we live in. You're constantly being watched, right? Well, the computers are really good at watching themselves too. And you really need to be looking at what's going on in your organization. You can learn all of these things because, whenever that compromise on that website took place or whenever that entry into your database took place, it was recorded somewhere. The real question is, what are you doing about it? And anybody looking at it? Are you surfacing those alerts? Are you surfacing those alerts in a way that you're not getting 10,000 alerts a day, but only 2 or 3, and you can manage it? So I wish I could say it was easy, you flip a switch, but it's really about dialing it in and getting that level of risk that you're willing to tolerate in alignment with how much time you're going to spend at an organization level dealing with system monitoring.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to add to that?
I just want to raise a question, which is how much responsibility accrues to the person who's looking at the information in terms of judging whether it is true, honest, factual, etc. This is something that we used to do in the dark ages. There were information intermediaries at that point who would go through information overload and throw out the stuff which was either a duplicate or questionable or, put it in another place. I wonder if people need to learn not to take everything at face value today, and I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think people sometimes, particularly on the open web, there are things that they search for and they get an answer and it's spurious, but they want to believe it.
Yeah.
They want to believe there is a cure for their particular part of cancer, and it's probably not carrot juice. But if you search cures for cancer, the top 10 are pretty far out.
Really?
Absolutely. Whereas if you start on a pharmaceutical company's site, or if you start at something that is reputable like WebMD, mm-hmm. you are going to get things that are reliable, but not. People don't necessarily start at a particular site. They start with a question, and they do the same thing inside the enterprise. They just start with a question.
That's right.
And they make the assumption, which is probably more valid inside the organization than not, they make the assumption that there's somebody somewhere who's curated this, who said, this has the seal of approval, and hopefully inside the enterprise, that is exactly what has happened. On the open web, you shouldn't assume that at all. You're nodding your head as if, no, maybe it's not even curated inside the enterprise?
I know it's not. I mean, I worked with one of the largest software companies in the world. They had designed a new search engine and they were trying it out on their stuff, right? So they just let it loose and turned it on, and were appalled at what they found, including pay records and internal documents which were confidential, etc. In that case, probably the information was very good, but is there any reason why you would expect it all to be good? And the answer, I think, is no. If it's on your hard drive and your hard drive is connected to a server and you've saved it because you said, this is ridiculous, I'm going to show it to a good friend of mine, then are you expecting that won't show up in the crawl? And there are a couple of questions over there.
Yeah, you.
From my general knowledge, there are certain websites, technically, there are websites that begin with, say, HTTPS.
Mhm.
Can you talk about the technical aspects of how to determine a valid search versus a suspicious search? Just, briefly, to the best of your ability. Thank you.
Had you asked that question 2 or 3 years ago, I'd have a very different answer. So it used to be that if you're running a legit site with a real business model behind it, and you had a web presence, you would, like you say, you would have HTTPS. You would have your website set up to be using transport layer security, where you have to go out and you have to pay money to a third party. You prove that, I'm from FireOak Strategies. So I would go out to some other company, say, I'm from FireOak Strategies. I want a certificate that proves my website is from FireOak Strategies. You write them a fairly sizable check. They do some digging, make sure that you're legit, give you a certificate. Today, you can get those for free with absolutely no validation needed. You just say, I need a certificate. They check that you're in control of the website for the moment where they issue it. You can see the problem here already, and you get a certificate. So right now, the majority of websites are using encryption because it's so easy to turn it on. So yes, that's encrypted, but we've really lost a lot of the authentication that used to come with it in that space. So I would say from now, it's if you see something that's not encrypted today, that's really kind of suspicious, because even the most, my son's blog is HTTPS because it's a button he turns on, right? It really has kind of lost a lot of the meaning. So
And
from
how
that
old is he?
perspective, he's 15.
15, okay.
So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
So,
The other criteria other than that, or it's just common sense? There's no technical criteria to kind of, on a high level, determine?
it's so complicated, and I would defer to my other panelists on this, but I would be really remiss to come up with, here's a list of 10 technical settings that you could check to determine the validity and the objectiveness of a website in any way, let alone enterprise search. It's really a lot harder than that today.
although I belong to a couple of associations that have a global membership, and one of them, last year, we had some members in, I think it was Norway, which isn't even part of the EU, who were complaining that it was just an HTTP site. And he said, I'm sure it's fine, but I don't feel comfortable accessing something that's just HTTP. Can't you make it HTTPS? Which our technical guy did almost overnight, and now you have explained to me why it was almost overnight, which I actually hadn't quite realized, so that was pretty useful. But I do think that particularly with GDPR, HTTPS is going to become the standard, at which point it becomes a target, correct?
It's really just the new common denominator, I think. Everything is going to be using HTTPS, to the point now that a lot of the browser manufacturers, instead of telling you that this site is now secure like it used to, it tells you that it's not secure. So if anybody uses Chrome, you've already noticed that behavior. I think it's going to be to the point where if you are not running an encrypted website pretty soon, that it's just going to stop working entirely.
Yeah.
So, which is great from a security perspective, because having HTTPS, having TLS on your website prevents things like your ISP from snooping on you, or from every other person at this conference seeing what you're doing on the guest wireless here, which, by the way, is happening, right? But it,
So
you
who
really
have you been
lose-
spying on?
What's that?
Who have you been spying on?
Oh, no, I'm just saying that one of the...
Just checking.
No, it's that's the concern, right? Is that your traffic can be viewed or manipulated in transit if it's not encrypted. So,
To Sue's point, talking about the internal stuff being authoritative,
yeah.
it'd be nice if that were the case. It'd be nice if we could say, here's your repository, this is where the authoritative content goes, and this is all we're going to index. It's just simple, not reality, because enterprises want everything searched. Every team wants to be able to find their content. When we moved from SharePoint 2013 to 2016, we had from 2010 to 2013, we had a pretty extensive governance document, well done. I think it was fairly well done. It was done with a Word document at the time, and when we went to start doing the migration, we searched for that document, and we found 150 copies of it at various stages of development. That was our document. The only way we could make sure that that stayed authoritative was in the next iteration of it. We did it as a wiki and said, go to the wiki page. That's where, that's all that's authoritative. But when you find in the enterprise, everybody copies stuff down. You find it, they copy it, and you end up with all kinds of copies at various stages of development. So that's just not going to be the case. But a bigger question, I think, came up in that discussion. If you combine the talk you guys had there a minute ago about bias, and then about confidence in the content that you find out in the internet, isn't it a little concerning though? We have to find a balance somewhere between controlling that content, curating it on the one hand, and having a free and open internet where exchanges of ideas can happen.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
I always go
absolutely.
back to, as I hear all this discussion going on, that old adage, who's watching the watchman in
Yeah.
a particular case.
That's why I said that teaching people how to decide whether something is valid, which is just a heroic thing to do. I used to go into my daughter's 5th grade class and read Newsweek to them, and I'd say, here's a sentence, is that an opinion or a fact?
No.
You can do this, it's possible, but it isn't happening, and very often the teachers themselves have no idea. So it's going to require a fair initiative, but, I wonder if citizen responsibility is something that we don't invoke enough. And the reason that I say so is not that I think citizens ought to be held responsible, but rather that I think that the problem is beyond control. I really do. And it has been for as long as I've been in the online industry.
Well, if search results are determined by algorithms and we don't know how those algorithms work, how can we have citizen responsibility? If we are doing things based on machine learning, again, that we don't know what the knowledge base is that the machine is learning from, how can we have citizen responsibility?
Okay, but I think that understanding how a search engine works is really pretty simple. I mean that. Yeah, there are all of these nudges to whether a person is an advertiser or not, but the fact is that search is similarity matching. That's what it does. It takes your query, takes the corpus of documents, it strips out of your query and out of the documents the verbs, grabs the keywords. If you're lucky, it grabs phrases, but probably not. And it matches them according to the number of times that your query word has appeared in each of the documents. Because computers can do that very fast. They count, right? So they measure 2 things: the number of times that the word appears and the number of times it appears in the corpus as a whole. In other words, how rare is that term? And then that's really how they work. There are various nudges, but that's what's going on a billion times a day at Google.
It seems like ethics would involve how they expand search. What is a synonym? Because that's the invisible part.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, and what is a synonym also, it differs depending on whether you are dealing just with an American English knowledge base or whether you have British English plus other languages that get in there. Your
Yeah.
synonyms aren't necessarily what you think they are. And that is another form of bias, I think. Because if the people responsible for the corpus are all Americans, they are looking at an English where they may not realize that there are other synonyms or other implications of languages. Is there anyone in here whose native language is British English as opposed to US English?
It's not my native language, but that's what I've learned.
Okay, all right, let me try this one on you. I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. So, I want to go shopping for trousers. Is trousers male or female?
There's no gender in English.
Well,
There is no gender in English, but if I input trousers, am I likely to retrieve men's or women's? Trousers in American English tends to be more towards the male side, even though it doesn't have a specific gender. So maybe I say slacks. Slacks might be gender specific. What if I say pants?
And besides, it's only plural. There's no singular to trouser.
No, they're absolutely. Well, and if you do a singular for pants, you get something completely different. You get, so you get a dog panting. But pants in British English is underwear. So you run into some really interesting, intriguing, misleading answers to your query depending on the language assumptions that have been made by human beings.
Because they just don't know. I mean,
They don't know.
think about looking for blue sweaters, American. Are you going to get navy jumpers? And yet, that would be the British, one of the British terms that would be appropriate.
And if you
But a
put in
jumper-
jumpers, you might get people jumping. You don't know.
Or you could get, if you were my age, a jumper was a kind of an overdress that, was a style of dress. Language is a wonderful, complex, and unpredictable way of communicating. And I think that we have to give it a certain latitude and expect a certain knowledgeability. And the next generation, I believe, of computing has to be able to take your context, the context of the topic, etc., and make some much more intelligent guesses. And the way to do that is not to automatically establish an algorithm that says if they're asking for jumpers, then it could be sweaters, but rather to say, did you mean this or that?
Yeah.
And I've been working on this kind of design for 30 years, and I have to tell you that every one of the experiments that I've been a part of has been a dismal failure. So, we really are going to have to take the intelligence of the user and use it, rather than be didactic about saying, I think you mean this, and you don't have any choice, because people know a lot more stuff than we can ever build into an algorithm. And that's very hopeful.
And algorithms, a lot of the newer technologies that sort of fall under that AI banner, so pick your technology under the AI banner, but a lot of these are predicated on the notion, particularly with machine learning, they're predicated on the notion that you can predict the future if you know the past. And yet, I think this also gets into a bias argument, particularly in things like human resources. If we have traditionally hired men for a particular position, and we have women applying, but the algorithm works against them because the past says, no, we don't hire them. And so that's, I think, where you have to have human intervention, because that really does become an ethical issue.
That's right. Somebody, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like disclosure is the only way to make this work. That, here's the list of the aspects we consider. You got stuff that there's other people who've done last week.
You know what? The problem, do you remember LexisNexis trying to do this? I think it was LexisNexis. All
It
you
was
had-
LexisNexis, but it was when it was Me Data Center, if you're talking,
Yes,
Me
you're
Data
right.
Central.
And
Are
it
you talking
was-
about the mosaic theory?
No, they were just, there was a Y button that you could click on.
Oh, that one, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was
okay,
late
okay.
90s, I think.
Yeah.
And the idea was that people really wanted to know why these results showed up. And considering that it was curated information and Boolean queries, it was, it was really fairly limited. But nevertheless, there was the Y button. Everybody hated it. So, your disclosure, there have to be ways of disclosing what the system is doing such that it doesn't increase the number. This is what I learned, to my great regret. You can't increase the number of clicks. Absolutely cannot increase the number of clicks. Have to change the way the interface looks and the functionality of that information. And the other thing that I think we haven't done a great deal of good work on is teaching people that, the search box is dead, that you can actually type in a sentence or whatever, and it will help the search engine figure things out. And again, we tried doing this in the 90s. With TextWise. Couldn't do it. Maybe now you can, I don't know.
I was thinking you were meaning mosaic theory, because I think that was a very early indication of where we are going now with AI. It was, and the whole idea was really very simple. You take a whole lot of disparate informations that are not classified government data, and if you get enough of them and you put them together, you end up with a classified document. And the FBI actually came and visited the CEO of LexisNexis to say, why are you putting classified documents, making them publicly available? And he said, we aren't. They're being created. The FBI did not like that answer. And similar things could happen today at a much grander scale, because the technologies we have now can handle so much more bandwidth. It's a trivial problem now. Back then it was not quite so trivial, but boy, was the FBI unhappy.
I want to go back to the concept of kind of opening the algorithm for inspection. So how many people here have a website or a link to a website in some way that they get the random spam mails that say, I am a search engine optimization specialist and I will get you on the first page of Google, right? There's an entire industry out there that exists just to figure out what Google's doing and find ways to manipulate what the search results are. And some of the things that these guys come up with are amazing. There was one just a little while ago. So when you go to a web page, you see what's on your screen. Well, it turns out there's this concept of the canvas. So you can put things on a web page and have them be like way off the screen. Well, somebody figured out that Google wasn't paying attention to which parts of the screen the human can actually see versus everything that's on the page. So you remember like a long time ago at the bottom of the web page and just about invisible text, there'd be like paragraphs and paragraphs of text just to add extra words for the search engine to find. And then they caught on to that and they started that work. Well, now they moved it, off to the side or in an invisible layer. And then Google catches on and they change it. And then they find something else. So That's why you're going to get a lot of resistance from the Googles and the Bings of the world who want to maintain their algorithm from releasing it, because it's just going to make it open for manipulation.
That's a good point.
One of the nice things though about enterprise search is you're sort of off from that problem. Not entirely, but in general,
Yep.
we can trust our metadata. We can trust the content. I met one marketing department that was spamming the search results with lots of confused words, but
Really?
other than that, it's basically straightforward. So that's something that, but an enterprise search could also say, we'll open for inspection.
Sure. And you could always use, an open search product if you're talking internal enterprise search, if you really wanted to have that. But now that's a different set of problems that you need to
Yeah.
set something up and maintain and build a server.
It's nice that we don't have to worry about that one.
Yeah. Question?
Usually, we have one here, yeah.
Well, I just feel that to your credit and to the credit of all the development, you cannot make a human a zombie, because if you give them everything, there's no room left for thinking and for implementing
That's
the
right.
tacit knowledge. And I'm talking from the aspect of being, I happen to speak 4 languages. And coming back to linguistics and to your question of English words,
Yeah.
the American words, the Australian words, or whatever the dialect
Yeah.
you use, I feel that if you do, I openly try to do translation, and I can see what Google returns. The 4 languages that I want to get. And if I have no idea, I could not blindfoldedly use that translation. So if you look for something and you have some brain, you can distinguish between and complement your knowledge to the search, because you can't expect anybody to give you 100%, because
That's
it's
right.
boring.
Yeah.
If you have no time to think, it's really boring and mundane. So, since life is a routine, you have to leave something to your imagination and to
Yeah.
figuring out and having that excitement of finding something, not just being given everything to you.
Right.
So I think the question is, if search is just a tool,
It's a statement to your support.
yeah, but I just wonder, if search is a tool, are we doing enough to make people understand how it works and what doesn't happen?
Do people want to understand?
Well, I don't know. I do.
Yeah, I know, but Sue, I hate to break this to you, but you're not the ordinary person.
I try
But I
not
mean,
to.
how many of in your organizations do you think your people would really say, why did I get this answer? They just say, you gave me the wrong answer. Yeah, Ted.
Scale in our culture today is a problem too, because it makes it just magnifies things. I mean, if somebody acted on a bit of misinformation back in the day, it might affect their home, or it might affect their neighborhood, or something along that line. The internet's gotten so big, and that information has now become so broadly available, it impacts countries.
Yeah.
Just the whole culture begins to, we have all this talk in the news today about fake news, and who's discerning that kind of stuff, and as it goes out, it has impact. Are you talking about the election?
No, I have, to that point, I have a question for the group, which is, since we are hearing this all the time about fake news, how much of that carries over into the enterprise? Are you seeing distrust of information within the enterprise? Are people starting to distrust all forms of information? Or is it just the fake news idea?
We've actually run into this in our work with a number of clients around enterprise search, where a great example is somebody will want to know what's the current vacation policy for my organization, and they'll go out and they'll search SharePoint or Delve or whatever their enterprise search is, and they'll find something, and they're like, I don't know if this is right, and they end up picking up the phone and they call HR, like, I found this document, but, and we've also heard time and time again, you're the gentleman in the red and black jacket, thank you for that comment earlier about doing a search and finding 1,000 versions of something. We see that all the time, and
Yeah.
it really kind of crushes the ability to trust. But it's really fascinating to me as I'm sitting here thinking, we're having these conversations. I mean, I think a lot of the same people who would not trust that search they did at work about the vacation policy will go home, read something on Facebook, and they're like, oh, that's got to be the truth. So I don't know what the the disconnect between those two experiences is.
We have a question in the back.
Yeah, so in our organization, we're having an issue with our security policy and how it's impacting search. So I was just curious because we talked about this. So before, we had what was too little transparency, and people couldn't find things that they expected to find through search. And our crawler calls everything, you just, obviously your security and your permissions on the SharePoint sites limits what you can see. So now we have shifted in the opposite direction of opening up everything, and now we have concerns of, well, my drafts are out there. People can take my draft and do it as fact and act on it, or if the crawler is super slow because now we have to show, we have to get everything, give everyone permission and access to, they have everyone has access to it. So it's like a weird dichotomy, and we have not found a balance. I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, we actually run into that quite a lot. We do knowledge management and information security consulting, and that issue is really common. There's a really common question. And a lot of times we'll hear from clients who say, Enterprise Search is just showing all these results for things that it shouldn't. I can see, the tax returns are out there. I found passports. I found, pay stubs. It's not Enterprise Search's fault. What it's doing is bubbling up and making it easy to find places where your information security policy isn't being applied in the way that it should be. So it really comes down to, what does your information governance program look like? What does your data classification policy say about things like report drafts? Are they something that everyone in your organization could get to, or just you personally or your project team? So your technical controls need to be in line with your policy, and then search should simply return everything that is out there that has been shared with you intentionally that you should be able to get to. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's not as easy as going into the admin center in Office 365 and turning on the Make Enterprise Search Work the way I want it to work switch.
Oh, that would be a nice button.
Yeah, it would.
Sue?
Yeah, I guess I just have a question, which is, I haven't done this in a while, because I haven't been working inside a SharePoint organization. But I can remember starting documents and having them automatically tagged even before I'd written the first word. And in fact, it always got my name wrong. Is that still the case? Because that's a huge problem. People just accept, I just want to get this written. Yeah. They click on it and they start. And I don't know if you're running into that, and if there is some way of improving the way things are tagged or started or whatever.
Do you have a central area within your organization that's only responsible for governance? Okay, so that's part of your problem then, because it's decentralized. So you may have a policy here and a policy here, so you don't have an overall corporate strategy, which is probably, I'm not saying it's going to solve everything, but it might help.
My question for your specific example would be, why shouldn't I be able to see your drafts? What policies in place to say that I should not be able to get to that? And if that doesn't exist, well, there's step one, right? And then once you have that, then technical controls can follow.
Yeah, Ted.
I hate to keep jumping in here, but
It's good.
that is an area I have to deal with all the time. And this goes back to the whole training thing, as you mentioned earlier about training people how to recognize truth and so on.
Yeah.
But also there's internal training. You have to, when we turned Delve on, I mean, that was fear temper. We figured somebody's going to get fired. And I've seen so many times stuff gets exposed, and it always goes back to whoever put that in there is not managing their permissions correctly.
Yeah.
When it comes to drafts, turn on, if that's what you want to use, you want to be able to put a draft out there and keep a piece out there that's in transition, then turn on versioning control and allow yourself to do
That's right.
minor versions until you're ready to publish that thing. The metadata you're talking about, for instance, when you just start the document, that still doesn't show up until that thing's been saved and published and crawled in our search system. So yes, it's putting metadata in there as you go, but you have control over that. You have to learn to use the tools. Again, every day my inbox is full of people who
Yeah, and I think the problem is that, why would you care? I mean, what you have to learn to be an employee is mountainous. How in the world do you diminish that to things that you really should care about because? And instead of having somebody stand up and say, okay, now we've got the new employee intake 3-week course here, and somebody stands there and drones on about all of the rules, that's not the way to get people to care.
They're not going to remember it anyway.
Exactly right. So there are lots of things that we need to do as we mesh humans and machines, and we have not been good at it so far. And I don't know how much we can expect the machine, even the clever machine, to be able to make up for our shortcomings.
Well, and I do think that that's why when people say, oh, robots are going to take all human jobs, I think you've just pinpointed why that is not going to happen.
One of the challenges that I see in the modern information systems that a lot of us are using, SharePoint, we've talked about that a lot today, Office 365, Google, Dropbox, whatever tool your organization is using to store, share, and manage your files, the default there is to give the end user the ability to share those files back out. Mm-hmm. And this is a paradigm shift. This is not something that we ever did back in the days of the map network drive, right? You had your U drive where it was just your stuff and when nobody else could get to it, and you'd have some departments. If you're in HR, you had access to the HR folder, right? We've all been there. If you wanted that special project folder because you're working on something with one guy from finance and 2 people from HR or whatever, it would be a help desk ticket to IT and somebody would set that up for you instead of just sharing. But now anybody can go in and share anything with anybody, and this Delve is like one of the best things that it does is surface who's done that and who's done that in really bad ways. That should be one of the features listed on the sales brochure for Delve.
Okay, with that, we are out of time, so thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to Eric and Sue for helping me out with this. Go forth and solve all your problems.
Somebody has to. Thank you.